Hello, how are you guys doing today? My name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. Today is the 11th day of January 2023, and I'm going to be reading from a book by John Coleman, which I was reading last night, One World Order, and I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you have eyes to see and ears to hear, because there have been many in the past who are trying to warn us of what is going on. And many people like to use the words conspiracy as to make people feel as though, you're weird or something of that nature, when in actuality, folks, it's the truth. But you may not agree with that, and that's your decision. But that doesn't mean it's not, you see, or is. Okay, let's go ahead and read this from One World Government, One World Order, Socialist Dictatorship, as he explains here how we think that communist is the big boogeyman. In reality, that is just a, a way of keeping you focused on Moscow, so to speak, or on the communists, you see. But really, actually, socialism has been going on for over 150 years in this country, if not longer. Okay? It's been going on for a long time. And it's been what we call, when I say socialism, it's the way of dismantling the law of the land, is being the Constitution, that is. And so they don't even follow the Constitution anymore. Most of these lawyers don't, because they're no longer following the Constitution. They're following a corporate entity, you see. So I was at page 16 last night, which, so we're going to go in that particular area. Just bear with me a second here. Okay, that spurred the attack on Pearl Harbor and got the United States in World War II at a time when the German army had thoroughly trounced the so-called Allies, who were staring defeat in the face in Europe. The rise of Harold Wilson as the future Prime Minister of England could be laid at the door of the Kennedy administration, which, having dispatched Harold Macmillan with one skybolt, as one commander put it, the Kennedy administration excluded kindness and know-how towards the Oxford socialists in gray flannels, as Wilson was described. Wilson went to America to find a way of sloganeering himself into the office, and he found it among the Madison Avenue advertising agents. Strange that socialism had to turn to capitalism to find out how things are done. Yeah, they borrow many concepts from that, but they also deviate from them also. Yet no sooner was Wilson installed as prime minister than he told the House of Commons that his policies would be socialism as usual, nationalizing of industry, social justice, and of course, tax reform. A bigger bite out of the incomes of corporation, payroll levies, and the whole socialist 9 yards. Decided, Wilson told his Fabian socialist colleagues that they could be sure of success because we have an American government in sympathy. What Wilson really meant was that the American government appeared more willing than ever to pay the bills for extravagant socialist spending by his labor government. You see how this is going on, folks? The United States has always been the little brother, so to speak. They've always used us and gotten us in all kinds of tangled mess. World War I, World War II, which had nothing to do with the United States, especially World War I, and how the CFR is actually a step brother also under the Royal RIAA, which is the kingpin, and so is the Tavistock Institute. They run us, folks. It's time to make a, we never, if we did win the war, we surely haven't acted like it, have we? Um, Prime Minister Wilson, making good on his American connections, borrowed $4 billion from the International Monetary Fund, the largest founder which was and remains the United States. Once again, it was demonstrated that the socialist programs could not support their own weight, and like the dinosaur, would collapse if not propped up. The International Monetary Fund was established by Lord Keyes, who described it as essentially a socialist conception. But some voices were being raised in the United States against the alarming socialist penetration of government that had begun with Wilson, accelerated with Roosevelt, and grown larger and bolder, I should say, and more outspoken in the Kennedy administration. One of those was Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin, a true patriot. McCarthy was determined to root out the socialists and the communists, agents of change, with which the United States State Department had become infested. A battle that McCarthy began in 1948 was the Truman administration and continued with the Eisenhower administration. The Fabian Society became thoroughly alarmed. How was it to defeat this penetration of the United States government as institutions against public exposure? For help, the Fabians turned to Americans for Democratic Action, who set about mounting a massive campaign of vilification against the senator from Wisconsin. Without this force to reckon with, there is no doubt that McCarthy would have achieved his goal in exposing just how far the American government and its institutions have been taken over by the Fabian socialists, which McCarthy mistakenly identified as communism. The ADA spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in efforts to curb McCarthy, even going so far as to distribute thousands of copies of the senator's personal finances in violation of Senate rules, which were disclosed to the Senate subcommittee. The socialist publication New Statesman suddenly became concerned with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, suggesting that McCarthy's hearings were imperiling those sacred rights. In other words, he was getting in the way of what we call doing business. You see, the ADA sponsored resolutions condemning McCarthy was proof positive that then, as now, the Democratic Party was in the hands of international socialists of the Fabian Society variety. Let me point out, folks, that this is a writing from the past. The Republican Party are in the same pocket with them. Okay, there's not any difference between these guys. Okay, even though they're making all this noise up there in Washington suddenly the last since they become so what these little laws are trying, these bills are trying to pass, but in reality, they will never get passed, folks. It's just a gimmick. They're going to put you to sleep again. They always do. See, they don't do what they say to do. You watch what they do, not what they say. The ADA was not at all shy about claiming credit for having stopped McCarthy. With the downfall of Senator McCarthy, the Fabian Society breathed a collective sigh of relief. This was about as close to exposure as had come. The one man who could have foiled the ADA attack failed to show up in the Senate hearings. Senator John F. Kennedy, a professor admirer of the senator from Wisconsin, was reputedly confined to a hospital bed when the vote came up. It has not been explained why he failed to prepare his vote. Kennedy actually owed his rise to power to McCarthy, who refused to campaign for Henry Cabot Lodge when Lodge was running against Kennedy in Massachusetts. That fact was not well known, bodes ill for the independence of the United States and the republic for which it stands. In the future, unless socialism is radically checked and then uprooted, the Pledge of Allegiance might well go something like this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the socialist government for which it stands. Let us not think this far-fetched. We should recall the small band of unimportant young men who started their movement in London, a movement that spread its dangerous poison across the entire world, were also considered far-fetched in their day. The Fabian Society was now reinvigorated, with the McCarthy threat disposed of and a new young president of the White House, one educated by Harold Laski at the London School of Economics and influenced by John Kenneth Galbraith. The socialists set prayer to make a quantum leap to the very citadel and muscle of the United States government. After all, wasn't Kennedy a New Frontier actually a book written by the great socialist Henry Wallace? Wallace had not flinched in putting socialism goals firmly in view. Socially disciplined men will work cooperatively to increase the wealth of the human race and apply their intimate skills to changing society itself. They will modify, that is, reform governmental and political machinery as well as the momentum and price system to achieve far wider possibilities of social justice and social charity, welfare that is, in the world. Men may rightly fully feel that they are serving a function as high as any minister of the gospel, so to speak. They will not be communists, socialists, or fascists, but plain men trying to gain by democratic methods the profound objectives of communism, socialism, or fascism. That the Kennedy administration originally embarked on a program that looked even more radical than that of the Roosevelt era is not disputed. Even the fact that the ADA selected his cabinet and advisors almost to a man is well known. In Britain, the Fabian socialists were broad smiles. Their time, it seemed, had arrived, but their happiness began to be tempted with reservations as news from the United States had it that Kennedy was not living up to their socialist expectations. The ADA mouthpiece, that is the New Republic, said in an editorial published by June 1st, 1963, in general, the Kennedy performance is less than impressive than the Kennedy style. Lassett's vision of a new Jerusalem in the English-speaking world and building a new socialist society seemed to have been put on hold, at least for a while. You'll notice that Lasky's vision says a new Jerusalem. Now think about that situation, folks. Who is involved in Jerusalem? It surely isn't the Palestinians. It's the other group you need to be aware of. And it's not just the regular Jews, it's the elite Jews. They've been at it for a long, long time, folks. Lasky had known how to manage Labor Party leaders, Atlee, Dalton, McDonald, and the Kennedy brothers. The question was his successor be able to handle the American side as well as he had done? The rise of Fabianism in the United States could be traced back in the Fellowship of New Life and later to the Boston Bellamy Club, which came into existence from being after the visit of Sidney Webb and R.R. Pease, P-E-A-S-E, historian of the Fabian Society, one of the original four Fabians to visit the United States in 1883. So if we follow this age, 1883, only 11 years earlier, the United States ceased to be a country. It became a corporation. Just making you aware of that, because that's what happened. Many things happened, that is, after the war between the states. Radically differences. The Bellamy Club was brought into being by General Arthur F. Devoy and Captain Charles F. Bowers. Backed by newspapermen Cyrus Field, Willard, and Francis E. Willard, the club did not have its intentions, the club did not have its intention, the advance of socialism. Devoy's main concern was the large influx of untrained immigrants into the United States, which he said were not ready to receive them. General Devoy felt that the situation should be nipped in the bud before it got completely out of hand. He could not have foreseen the horrendous, deliberately contrived immigration situation that developed in the United States in the 1990s, thanks to the socialist policies, you see. As Devoy and his friends were getting ready to found the Boston Bellamy Club, Webb arrived from England in September of 1888 and was put in touch with the club's founders. Sensing an opportunity, Webb and Pease were able to include in the club principles the nationalization of private industry. That's communism. That statement there, the nationalization of private industry. It could also be said socialist, but that's one of the things, the pranks of the Communist Manifesto. But anyway, but the name to be changed to the Boston Nationalist Club. The opening meeting was attended by Webb and Edward Bellamy on December 15, 1888. The seed of Fabian socialism in the United States that was to sprout and grow to a huge tree was planted. Advancing into the arts in 1910, Shaw's plays were being put on by the Theater Guild in New York City by Professor Kenneth McGowan of the Harvard Socialist Club, using methods learned from the Moscow Arts Theater. The League of Industrial Democracy, Americans for Democratic Action, was still far in the future, but the foundation for their organization had already been laid. Shaw, it's George Bernard Shaw, and H.G. Wells were puffed by literal agents all over America, particularly in college towns and socialist magazines. The New Republic and the Nation and the Socialism of Our Time, edited by Norman Thomas and Henry Latimer, L-A-I-D-E-L-E-R, were taken off. A frequent contribution to the New Republic, Lasky taught at Harvard all through World War I. His unkind critics said thus he was to avoid any possibility of having to serve in some capacity or another in the British war effort. It was from the New Republic that Woodrow Wilson received support, not only for getting the United States into that conflagration, but right throughout its disastrous course. If ever there was a socialist war, this was it. The New Republic did not have the same concerns for the terrible slaughter going on in Russia under the skies of Bolshevik Russia. Lasky was an enthusiastic admirer of Felix Frankfurter, who was a chief Supreme Court justice. In some of his letters and praise of Frankfurter revealed the extent of the penetration of the Fabian socialists into the United States justice system. You see, there's all moles here, folks. This is what's going on. This is anti-Americanism. While on one of his many visits in the United States, Lasky urged the ADA and other American socialists to take active measures in getting higher taxation laws passed. Newer higher taxes on unearned high incomes was the way to get taxation equitably distributed. See, this is all, again, taking from the haves and giving to the have-nots. But they're not, look, folks, most of these people are rich. But they don't take it out of their pocket, like I said last night. They never take it out of their pocket. All they do is take it from your pocket. He also kept in constant touch with his friend Judge Felix Frankfurter, urging him to press for reforms of the United States Constitution, particularly the constitutional separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and the judicial branches. Lasky was constant at the side of Frankfurter and constantly attacking the United States Constitution, derisively referring to it as capitalism's strongest safeguard or a class document. Lasky called Roosevelt the sole bulwark against the fascist form of capitalism. Interestingly, see, this is how they point this thing, is that they want to jettison you over here to the fascist form of capitalism. But in reality, they themselves have done that. See. That Lasky was not charged with sedition for trying to overthrow the United States Constitution was a big mistake. A frequent visitor to Roosevelt's White House, he was also very secretive about it. Such visit never mentioned in the press, you see. Meetings were always arranged through Felix Frankfurter. During one visit, Lasky is alleged by his biographer to have told Roosevelt either capitalism or democracy must prevail, and urged the president to save democracy. By democracy, Lasky obviously meant socialism. The socialists having long ago adopted democracy as a standard bearer of socialism. During World War II, Lasky frequently urged Roosevelt to make the world safe by laying a foundation for post-war socialism. By the way, that is part of the foreign policy, is that to make the world safe, but it's also, setting up supposedly democracies in other countries as we overthrow these countries. Okay, this is what these wars are about. It's not only pillage and taking and killing, it's also putting a new form of government in other areas of the world. The socialist education that Roosevelt received from Lasky is said to have almost equaled that received by John F. Kennedy, while Lasky's pupil at the London School of Economics. There were some who were aware of what was going on. Congressman Tinkham, that's spelled Tinkham, introduced into the Congressional Record House January 14, 1941, a letter written by Amos Pinchot, Pinchot, P-I-N-C-H-O-T. The Pinchot letter stated, many young socialists declare that what is generally called the Roosevelt program is in reality the Lasky program imposed on New Deal thinkers and finally on the president by the London professor of economics and his friends. The only thing wrong with that bold statement is that Lasky was a professor of political science, not economics. Otherwise, the observation was right on target. Lasky carried on a lengthy correspondence with Frankfurter, urging him to be vigilant and push the political psychology of the Fabian socialism. There can be no doubt whatsoever that Lasky's advice to Frankfurter served as the basis for sweeping changes made by the Supreme Court, changes that completely altered the course and character of the United States. If ever it could be said that the New Deal had a father, that father was not Roosevelt, but the Fabian Society professor Harold Lasky. Even to this day, so few Americans are aware of the vast influence the Fabian Society Professor Lasky had on Roosevelt. Remember that Colonel House was actually involved with Franklin Roosevelt, but only in the first 2 or 3 years of his administration. He passed away. So this is what's happened simply is once House is no longer there, he's passed away, then they bring someone else in to hurry on Roosevelt and certain policies, you see. 6 months after the Pearl Harbor got the United States into World War II as planned, Eleanor Roosevelt invited Lasky to be the keynote speaker at the International Students Congress that was set to take place in September of '42, the one that Churchill refused to let Lasky attend. Congressman Woodrow of Michigan put it very succinctly when he denounced Lasky as having a key to the back door of the White House, and patriots been able to assess the private letters between Lasky, Frankfurter, and Roosevelt. They might have aroused enough righteous indignation to get Lasky expelled from the country, a fate he richly deserved. Graham Wallas, that is Graham Wallas, W-A-L-L-A-S, was another leading socialist whose influence over Frankfurter and Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes is said to have turned American jurisprudence upside down. It is said that through William Wiseman, head of the MI6 North American desk, Lasky got Frankfurter appointed to one of the very first purely socialist oriented panels called the Mediation Commission on Industrial Unrest. Interesting title, isn't it? In Britain, Fabians penetrate every corner, every nook and cranny of the civil and military scene. No facet of society was immune to this penetration, which in the past, is the past, it was to follow in its invasion of the United States. Truly, socialism is more deadly enemy than ever faced by George Washington and his troops during the American War of Independence. This ongoing war never ceases. Day or night, the battle for the hearts, minds, and souls of the American nation goes forward. One of the bulwarks against socialist penetration is the Christian religion. Coleman, Attlee, a leading Fabianist who went on to become Prime Minister of England, put the success of the Fabian socialists down to the penetration of labor. But Irish Catholic labor was never penetrated by Webb, Shaw, or any other leading lights of the Fabian society. There's much hope in this for us today as we seek to find ways of halting socialism's relentless march across the North American continent, a march that will end in the camps of communist slavery, for indeed, socialism is the road to slavery. When in reality, folks, right now, we are already slaves. We've been slaves. We're taxed to death, okay? We have jobs now that don't pay anything. Seriously. There are no decent jobs anymore in this country, folks, unless you're one of them. You are working for them or involved with them. But if you're not, you get a job that you may get, and mainly you may be lucky to get $15 an hour. In reality, you need to be making close to $30 an hour just to make ends meet, because inflation is rampant these days. They don't bother to tell you that, neither do they. And it's them, they're involved in it. They're completely involved in it. And you can guarantee everybody's involved in it. It doesn't matter what political party it is, folks. The whole idea of what I'm doing this for is not for you to go out and vote. The whole idea of what I'm doing here to share with you simply is to make the veil come down and you would wake up and see what's going on. And when you become aware of that, you don't have to be pushed for any political thing. Your dissent your lack of consent for the government is what's going on, and your dissent against what they're doing, you see. The slippery, slimy, treacherous method adopted to spread socialism is no place better demonstrated than the prominent socialists who were never recognized such. These leading lights appeared in positions of great power while never openly admitting their socialist aspirations. A few names will help to illustrate the point in Britain. The Right Honor L.S. Amery, A-M-E-R-Y, lecturer at Livingston Hall, an important education center. Professor A.D. Lindsay, lecturer at Kingsley Hall, an important education center. Annie Besant, who was part of the esoteric Christianity. She was also a leader of the Theosophical movement. Rudolf Steiner was involved in that group at one point and eventually left that group. Oswald Mosley, MP and fascist leader in England. This is amazing. This one I never thought. Malcolm Muggeridge, author, scholar, and lecturer. Bertrand Russell, elder statesman, the Committee of 300, Kingsway Hall lecturer. Wickham Steed, S-T-E-E-D, perhaps one of the most famous of all British Broadcasting Corporation commentaries, whose opinions influenced millions of the BBC listeners. Arnold Toynbee, Kingsway Hall lecturer. J.B. Priestley, author. Rebecca West, Kingsway Hall lecturer. Anthony Wedgwood Benn, B-E-N-N, Kingsway Hall lecturer. Cindy Silberman, lecturer and parliamentarian. On the American side, the following personalities kept their socialist belief well hidden. That would be Archibald Cox, the Watergate special prosecutor. Arthur Goldberg, Secretary of State, United States Representative. Henry Steele, I've never even heard of this guy. Henry Steele, C-O-M-M, commander, writer and publisher. John Grutteren, writer, reporter for Life magazine. George F. Kennett, specialist on Bolshevik Russia. Joseph and Stephen Aesop, writers, newspaper columnists, opinion makers. Dr. Margaret Mead, for sure, anthropologist, author. Martin Luther King, part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, civil rights leader. Abraham Harriman, industrialist, roving representative, prominent Democrat. Birch Bayh, B-A-Y-H, United States Senator. Henry Fowler, Undersecretary, U.S. Treasurer. G. Mendon Williams, industrialist, Department of State. Adela Stevens, a politician. Paul Volcker, which was the Federal Reserve Board chairman, I think was in the Carter administration, and I think also in the Reagan administration also. Chester Bowles, B-O-W-L-E-S. Harry S. Truman, President of the United States. Lowell Weicker, W-E-I-C-K-E-R, United States Senator. Now we see people I know heard of. Herbert Humphrey, U.S. Senator, also ran for president in 1968. Walter Mondale, a United States Senator, also. These two I just mentioned, are tremendously liberal. Liberal means they're socialists. Bill Clinton, President of the United States. And William Sloan Coffin, C-O-F-F-I-N, church leader. There are hundreds more names, some prominent, others not so prominent, but the foregoing are enough to make this the point. The careers of these people fit very neatly the type of enemy described by President Andrew Jackson. One person who contributed a great deal to the spread of socialism in Britain and the United States was the famous Malcolm Muggeridge. The son of H.T. Muggeridge, Malcolm enjoyed a distinguished career writing for Punch with good concentration in Moscow. I'm going to say this about this guy. This is the reason why I'm completely blown away by him, because I know who he is. Somewhat. I've read some of his articles in the past. He is someone who supposedly was, I thought, was fighting against the social liberal persistent system in his early days in the 1918s and 20s, such and such. But this is a great surprise. I didn't know this. The fact that he was a nephew of the great late Beatrice Webb, wow, did not hurt. No wonder. Muggeridge wrote for the New Statesman and the Fabian News and was much sought after as a speaker of the Society weekend schools. Malcolm Muggeridge became one of the main draw cards for socialism in the United States and was often featured very prominently on television interviews. So see, I can even be fooled, see. Okay, Malcolm Muggeridge. Interesting. You learn something every day. So we're going to continue on here, see how far we go. We're going to enter the next chapter. This is chapter 2. What socialism is, why it leads to slavery. Again, this is from John Coleman's book, What Socialism Is, Why It Leads to Slavery. Again, the chapter. Where the ends they seek are concerned, socialism and communism are virtually interchangeable terms. Indeed, Lenin's party continued to call itself Social Democrat until the Seventh Party Congress of March 1918, when it submitted the term Bolshevik as a protest protests against the non-revolutionary attitude of the socialist parties of the West. Ezra Taft Benson, A Race Against Time. That's a quote from him, December 10th, 1963. Throughout Restructuring, we want to give socialism a second wind. To achieve this, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union returns to its origins and principles for the Bolshevik Revolution, to the Leninist ideas about the construction of a new society. Mikhail Gorbachev, in a speech at the Kremlin in July of 1989. Interesting speech, isn't it? It wasn't too much longer that the Soviet Union fell. They fell, I think, on purpose to fool people as though communism was dead. Communism is not dead, but it's just morphed into something else, you see. They're very clever, folks. They really are. We're not talking about peanut people here. We're talking about people who are involved, but also simply they have the press in their favor. They've got money behind them. It doesn't happen by accident. These highly revealing comments and others which we shall quote as we proceed put socialism in the proper perspective. Most modern-day Americans have only a vague idea what socialism is about, viewing it as a semi-benign movement whose goals are generally improvement of the living standards of the ordinary people. So they've already fooled the ordinary person here in this country. They think they're really good people, but they're not. They're part of pulling the whole system, the whole capitalist system that once was in this country. In fact, we've been at war, not a physical war, but a war of the mind here so far for a long time. And it's just their attitude simply is, we'll take the long road instead of the short road. In other words, they didn't feel that they could actually ever win militarily against the United States, so they chose to use stealth in order to bring it down, just like a Trojan horse, so to speak. Nothing could be further from the truth. Socialism has one place to go, and that is communism. We have been besieged by the media, led to believe that communism is dead. Correct. But some thinking will convince us otherwise. The Fabian socialists closely follow the Communist Manifesto of 1848, but in more genteel, less abrasive manner. Their aims, however, were the same: a world revolution which would end in a one-world government, the new world order in which capitalism would be replaced by socialism in a welfare state, in which every individual would be beholden to the dictatorial socialist hierarchy for everything in life. Yeah, you hear this. I'm trying to think of his name all of a sudden. I can't think of his name. Maybe I come to it, but he basically says you'll own nothing in the future and you'll be happy. You see, that's socialism. But you won't be happy, folks, if you understand what's going on. We're talking about your lives, but we're also talking about your children and your grandchildren eventually in the future. You need to know their game plan so that you can actually speak out against it in one way or the other. There would be no private property, no constitutional government, only authoritarian rule. Every individual will be beholden to the socialist state or its substance. And that's what they're doing. They're saying, oh, we'll pay for your living now, you see, a monthly stipend, you see. And you would have never heard that 20 years ago, folks. Never would have heard that. But it's obviously right in there, they're saying it now, such and such. But when in reality, simply as they said, they're going to pay you. That's to say, as I'm saying, for example, $1,200, okay? But as the economy continues to get worse, as the economy, implodes, $1,200 won't do any good neither in the future, neither, folks. You see. And then they'll control you. Because there won't be any jobs. There won't be any way of actually fending for yourself. Let me continue. Outwardly, this would be, in theory, be of great benefit to the ordinary people, but an examination of socialist experiments in England reveals the system is a complete unworkable failure, as we shall show elsewhere. Great Britain in 1994 had totally collapsed because of the socialists and their welfare state. The Fabian socialists set out to achieve their goals in England and the United States by placing intellectuals in key positions from where they were able to exert undue influence in changing the direction of both countries. The United States, the two prime agents in this regard undoubtedly were Professor Harold Lasky and John Kenneth Galbraith. In the background, one of the old guards of British Fabianism, Graham Wallas, spelled again Wallas, was director of propaganda. Together, they wrote the basis of Fabian Society of Socialism. The Fabian Society, therefore, aimed at the reorganization, I should say, of society by the emancipation of land, industrial capital from individuals and class ownership, and vesting of them in the community for the general benefit. That is, the society accordingly works for the extinction of private property and land. I talked to a couple of people in the past who have come from the state of New Jersey and other parts. I am completely blown away how much people pay for their property taxes per year. And I have friends who actually have lived or are actually living in New Jersey, and it's remarkable how much people pay there compared to people in the Southeast where I live at. It's probably 3 times and not 4 times as much, if not probably maybe 5 times as much that people here don't pay compared to what it is up north. For the attainment of these ends, the Fabian Society looks to the spread of socialist opinions and the social and political changes consequence thereof. It seeks to achieve their ends by the general dissemination of knowledge as to the relation between the individual and the society in the economic, ethical, and political aspect. What it boils down here is really clear. You're dealing with the collective and the individual. The collective doesn't have personal freedom, folks. They work as a machine. They're forced to work as a machine somewhat. That's what communism is, or socialism is in a lot of ways. Individual freedom allows someone to live their life in the way they should, as long as they don't do not harm anybody, not honor, but harm anybody, but yet also resist anyone who seeks to harm them. They don't seek to harm people, but they will protect themselves. But what's happened simply is that you've got this system, collectivism, that's always has been involved in the Soviet Union when it started. And it's also in most of Europe. The whole idea, the apparatus is part of this. It's a general brainwashing of people. And they don't even have themselves. They think they're free, just like they do here in the United States. But you pay taxes all the time, you see, on anything. You know, food, water, property, you name it, it's there. Go out, go shooting, you gotta have a license, all these kind of things, you see. Just want to explain. In 1938, the aims and objects of the society were somewhat altered. That is, the Federal Fabian Society of Socialists is therefore the aim of the establishment of a society in which the economic power of individuals and classes shall be abolished. Of course it is, through their collective ownership and democratic control of the economic resources of the community. It seeks to secure these ends by the method of political democracy. The Fabian Society shall be affiliated with the Labor Party. Its activities shall be in furtherance of socialism and the education of public along with socialist lines by holding of meetings, lectures, discussions, groups, conference, and summer schools, promotion of research into political, economic, and social problems, and periodicals by any other appropriate means. Yeah, it's a way of basically brainwashing people. We're so far away from what people were even 100 years ago, folks. One is at once struck by the number of times community appears alongside the playing down of individual rights. Yes, yes, very much so. Anyone that speaks about individual rights these days is considered some kind of awkward person. That's why they wrap it up in the community. We care about the community. But that's bullshit, folks. It's all bullshit. In this, it appears that Fabian socialists set his face against Christianity from the earliest gatherings of the original few in London. The determination to nationalize industrial projects that served the public was very evident and bore a striking resemblance to which the Communist Manifesto of 1848 said on the subject. It was also evident that the purpose of Fabian socialists was to establish a national cooperative commonwealth society in which everyone would have the same rights to the economic wealth of the nation. Not exactly, folks. They'll just give you a part of the pie, but it's a small piece of the pie. Very small piece for all the thousands to be, while they themselves are, they'll be eating at the trough, so to speak. It's about them ruling over you and you having less and less of anything. The Boston Bellamy Club, which opened in 1888, succeeded the Fellowship of New Life with Theosophical Learning and became its first Fabian socialist enterprise in the United States. The basis was somewhat different. The principle of the brotherhood of humanity is one of the eternal truths that govern the world's progress on lines which distinguish humans from brute nature. No truth can prevail unless practically applied. Therefore, those who seek the welfare of man must endeavor to suppress the system found on brute principles of competition and put it in its place another based on the nobler principle of association. So what they're done is that even the whole idea of capitalism today, people see this, and rightfully so. What has happened is simply is we don't have what we call a laissez-faire issue type of economy. We have nothing but what I call bully capitalism. And so that's the big bad wolf here, so to speak, okay? And so they're pointing to that and saying this. But that's what is going to be even worse with socialism, folks. You don't understand that this simply is a snare in order to. It's like the wolf is in charge of the hen house. You see? At one time, people had equal opportunity to do whatever they wanted to, you see, and could build their houses, could live in freedom, um, had individual rights, such and such. But now, it's a massive brainwashing. We have to think about the community, and it's taught to children. It's taught in education everywhere, folks. It's all there. Unless you're a good parent and see this, either you take your children out of the stinking schools, and that's your right to do, although they put a lot of fear against you. And it's also the breakdown of the family, which is what they're all about too. They want that because that's the pillar of what the society is, folks. So therefore, those who seek the welfare of man must endeavor to suppress the system founded on brute principles of competition, put into place another based on the nobler principles of association. We advocate no sudden or ill-considered change. We make no war upon individuals who have accumulated immense fortunes simply by carrying out to a logical end the false principles upon which business is now based. The combination, trust, and syndicates of which people at present complain demonstrates the practicability of our basic principle of association. We merely seek to push the principle a little further and have industries operate in the interest of the nation. The people organized the organic unity of whole people. The prose was the work of Sidney Webb and Edward Pleece, Fabian Society historian, who traveled to the United States in the 1880s to set in motion the American Fabian socialists. The mindness of the tone and choices of word belies the iron-hard inner core of revolutionary aims. The use of the word of reforms was intended to disarm critics, as were Fabian publications like the Fabian News, which advocated reforms that would prove particularly injurious to the United States Constitution. They paved the way for the ongoing revolution that is changing the United States from a confederated republic to a socialist welfare system. It was George Washington who described the United States as a Confederate republic. In the American Fabian of 1895, unlike the disguised socialists who infest the United States House and Senate and Judicial and who act as advisors to the president, the Fabian socialist aims for America rather plainly stated. We call our paper the American Fabian for two reasons. We call it Fabian because we desire to make it stand for the kind of educational socialism work which is so ably done by the English Fabian Society. We call our paper the American Fabian because our policies must and measure different from those of English Fabian. England and America are alike in some things, and some things are utterly unlike. England Constitution readily admits to constant through gradual modification. The American Constitution does not readily admit to such change. England naturally doesn't. Sure, England can thus move to socialism almost imperceptibly. Our Constitution, being largely individual, must be changed to admit socialism as each change necessary to a political crisis. Thus, from the very beginning, it was clear that the main challenge to introducing socialism in the United States was the Constitution, and that from that day onward, it became the target of socialist attacks on the institution that made up the Confederate Republic of the United States of America. As we shall see, this end, collegists, hardened socialists like Walt Whitman, Rostow, were employed to undermine the very foundation of the nation. A trained observers were quick to recognize Fabian socialists were not just a nice, friendly debating society run by professors and educated later who talked with political accents and projected an air of sweet reason aidableness. No, they come in as these sweet, kind people, so to speak. They remind me a lot of the Unitarians, folks. They remind me a lot of the Unitarians. That is in a church group. They're that type of people. They are what I call good, giving people too. I'm not saying they're bad people, but they're missing a point. They don't understand that they're being used. That's what's happening. They're being used. Fabian socialists developed the art of dissembling and lying without seeming to lie. Many were deceived in England and later in the United States, where we are still being deceived on a grand scale, but there were occasions when socialist leaders could not contain themselves, such as the occasion of the 1936 Eastern Spring Conference of Professional Schools for Teachers. Roger Baldwin explained the double meaning of words so often used by Fabian socialists. Progressive means the forces working for the democratization of an industry by extending public ownership and control. But folks, it's not public ownership. See, it's not public. It's not you and me. They'll make you think that, but it's not. It's a red flag. While democracy meant strong trade unions and government regulations of business, ownership by the people, industries that serve the public. But see, government itself is force. You see? So if you're going to regulate businesses, you're going to put these people out of business. And the huge psyop that's happened the last 2 years, over 2 years now, is destroyed this country immensely on purpose. It's what it was. It was a psychological operation. There was never anything of any threat, folks. The threat is quite the opposite when people get the jab, you see. So it's a psyop. Senator Ledman was another socialist who was unable to contain his eagerness to introduce Fabian socialism in the United States. Speaking on the occasion of the American Fabian League Anniversary Symposium on Freedom and the Welfare State. Those two don't even go together, folks. They're totally oxymorons. It's on one side or the other. It's amazing how they've done this. 170 years ago, the welfare state concept was translated into the basic law of Islam by the founders of the Republic. No, there wasn't. See how they skew this here? The founding fathers were the ones who readily originated the welfare state. Ledman, like so many of the socialist colleagues in the Senate, had not the foggiest notion of the Constitution. So it's not surprising that he got it mixed up with preamble to the Constitution, which was never made a part of the Constitution simply because the founding fathers rejected the concept of welfare state. I'm not saying that these people are perfect neither. Don't need to set this Constitution up. No, I'm not. I'm not saying that either. The preamble to the Constitution to create a more perfect union and to promote the general welfare. Senator Ledman seemed to be engaging in a wistful thinking, but this change is not part of the United States Constitution. He also appeared to be engaging in a favorite socialist technique of twisting words and their meaning. Of course he is. in reality, promote general welfare, as far as I understand it, would be simply let people work for themselves and benefit, not some type of giving a program. It would allow people to go out there and get land and own land and not to pay property tax and make money, that is, by raising crops, whatever they do. That was the whole idea, not some general welfare, so it's something from the government. They wanted people to come here, that is, the United States, to build this country up and set it up because they were the creditors, you see, of the country. You see, the ones that produce, the ones that are the creditors of it. It makes the country work, it makes it move like a well-oiled machine, so to speak. But they've completely turned that all around. There's a general welfare clause in the United States Constitution, and it's found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Delegated Powers of Congress. But in this section, the setting, it means the general welfare of all citizens. That is to say, their state of well-being, which is a far cry from the socialist meaning of a general handout, a dole, i.e., individual welfare provided by the state. Correct. And what they're doing right now in the last 2 or 3 years is a system of government that is actually all about, quote unquote, giving something to people in order to entice them to be dependent even far more upon the system. They've done it on purpose, you see. But the American people had a choice in actually saying, we see this PSYOP, hello, we see it, we're not going to participate in this bullshit. You see, if the Americans understood that, but in fact, they were all caught up in fear, you see. They gave away their precious liberty in that fear. Propose to implement their plan to attack industrial capital came on a crafty scheme proposed by Rexford Guy Tugwell. The scheme involved appointing consumers to the 27 industrial boards that were set up under what we call the National Recovery Act. This is all under Roosevelt. Tugwell was really trying to do away with the profit motive, stripping up it was seemingly benevolent intentions of reducing prices to consumers. The real intention was to slice the profits of the entrepreneurs and increase the wages of the workers accordingly. But the scheme was declared unconstitutional by a unanimous decision of the Supreme Court in 1935. The court was not yet packed with liberals, you see, or socialist judges. Roosevelt was quick to change that imbalance, though. It's safe to say that the Supreme Court in the 20s and 30s really saved the United States from being taken over by the famous socialists who had come pouring into every level of government, banking, industry, and the Congress in an effort to literally overwhelm the country. Socialists, in their endeavor to get past the Constitution with so-called laws like the unconstitutional Brady Bill, do not know what the United States Constitution is. The perfect equilibrium or balance of the common law. The way in which the Constitution was drafted was that all its provisions meet in the center to neutralize each other, which is why bills the socialists try to slip through on the premise that they can divide the Constitution are null and void. The Constitution has to be read as a whole. It cannot be isolated and parted to fit the weird aspirations of men like President Clinton. This is why Ramsay MacDonald came up against and is what totally frustrated Professor Lasky. Yeah, it's to look at the whole. It's not to take, I'm just going to pull this little section out and this is what I think. No, you have to read it as it in its own entirely. These guys are crafty. They're devils. Famous Society of London and its American counterpart were not known for letting obstacles stand in their way. To get around constitutional safeguards, the American Fabian League came up with ideas that any of their proposals that ran counter to the Constitution should be subject to a referendum. Obviously, with their considerable resources and with almost the entire jackal press in their pockets, the Fabians felt sure that they could swing public opinion their way. Just look at what they did in standing behind George Bush's totally illegal Gulf War. Be aware of the true nature of socialism and its aims. It makes it easier to understand why the Bolshevik revolutions were brought and paid for by the City of London and Wall Street backers. Backed by government action, which seemed always to help the Bolsheviks. In fact, if the United States had not given them food during the 20s, folks, they would have starved to death. They stole all the food from Ukraine. Over 10 million people died in Ukraine, folks, because the Russian soldiers came there to steal their food. They were the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Get it? And they killed these people. They died of hunger. And they're doing the same thing right now. Look around you. Oh, there's a bird flu. And people are going to have to kill all these animals. We're going to have to kill all these chickens, you see. And you see why your eggs are going up so expensive, you see. And it's going to be now, guess what? There's going to be less and less egg people have chickens, so there's less and less competition, you see. And not only that, your dollar isn't worth anything. It's massive inflation going on, and it's going to get worse. It's just the way how they destroy countries, folks. The Bolshevik Revolution was so beloved by Gorbachev was not an indigenous revolution of the Russian people. Rather, it was a foreign ideology forced upon the Russian nation at the cost of millions of lives. Bolsheviks were never wanted nor requested by the Russian people. They had no say and no defense against them monstrous political, social, and religious forces that overcome their land. Yes, and it was all the industrialists here in the United States and the bankers who supported all this. And they didn't give a damn about people there, folks. They didn't. And you had newspaper columnists going to the Soviet Union when all this was going on and put these rosy pictures of, wow, this is a really great place to live at. It's just so with socialism, which force human beings to accept deliberately engineered changes of a most far-reaching nature which they don't want and which are carried out against their wills. Take the so-called Panama Canal Treaty as an example. The only difference between Bolsheviks and socialists is that in the former, brute force and terror tactics are used, while the socialist does his work slowly and stealthily. The intended victim never knows who the enemy is nor what the end result will be. Correct. Tremendously correct. In world revolution, we find the true aims of communism and their socialist twin. The goal of world revolution is not the destruction of civilization in a material sense. The revolution desired by the leaders is moral and spiritual revolution, an anarchy of ideas which all standards set up through the 19th century shall be reversed. All honor traditions trample underfoot. Above all, the Christian idea finally obliterated. A study of Franklin Roosevelt's book, On Our Way, yields substantially to the same conclusion. Emma Goldman was one of the socialist brightest stars, engineered the murder of President McKinley. This was a direct method favored by communism, but in the last 2 decades, we have seen the type of socialist anarchy that uses calculation, slander, treacheries, lying, the inauguration of individual members of the House, Senate, and the presidency. We have attempted to reveal the dreadful things that were going on, such as Senator Joseph McCartney and Senator Harry Long and Vice President Agnew. This is much longer, but the names should suffice to make the point. The famous socialist nobility is far from being true. They want to gain control of education, the publishing business, for the sole purpose of altering the minds of the people by falsely changing the premise upon which opinions are made, individual and in mass. A smaller group of Fabian socialists set out to accomplish this by moving silently and stealthily, thereby not alerting the audience they wish to conquer or capture as to their real purpose. There are snakes in the grass, folks. It can be said with a certain degree of accuracy that today, in 1994, the small group has come a long way and that they virtually control the destiny of the English-speaking world. This book was 1994. The Bolshevik Revolution would never have got off the ground were it not for the full backing and financial resources of leading socialists in Britain and the United States. No, they never would have gotten off. They would have never even succeeded. Wouldn't even come close. The rise of Bolsheviks and how it was financed by Lord Alfred Milner and the Wall Street banks, controlled on a day-to-day basis by Milner's emissaries, Bruce Lockhart and Sidney Riley of British intelligence MI6, is detailed in Diplomacy by Deception. So reality simply is the West was helping these guys. You see, they're helping them destroy a people. that probably 85 to 100 million people died because of these evil people. We know a lot of this simply is because of Solzhenitsyn, who was probably the greatest light that is in a very dark country, wrote a few books, and he wrote them in his own mind and was able to publish them. And it had and suddenly truth actually shone out, and suddenly it's like, this is light, even though they had been. You see, you don't have to take much light in darkness, folks, to penetrate darkness. You see, it's a different sort of situation if it's light in a lighted area. It doesn't penetrate. But in a dark society or country like the Soviet Union was, it took just a flicker of a candle to actually affect people. And it says something's wrong here. Because all the people they knew were dead. $85 to 100 million people is a lot of people, folks. And don't think it won't happen here neither. One of the sayings that simply is Solzhenitsyn speaks of is that we stood by and let it happen. In the middle of the night, we let our comrades down, our families, people we knew, in apartment buildings that came in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and a knock on the door. And next thing you know, no one stopped these people. They may have only been 2 or 3 people, and they took them away and threw them in camps, eventually butchered them. The United States, the socialist preparators hang other signs outside their public political shop windows. No one ever calls himself or herself a socialist. No, at least not in public. They wear no badge, register themselves liberal, progressives, and moderates. Power-hungry moves are distinguished skies in terms of peace and humanitarians. One other thing I need to point out here, folks, there are 2 wings that is on an eagle, so to speak. Both parties, Republican and Democrat, represent something. Okay, what has the Republicans done in the last 50 or 60 years, folks? Have they made life better, or have they just simply gone along with the Democrats? They've gone along with most of the time with the Democrats. Oh, they're compromising a little bit. The Democrats give them something such a little bit, and then, oh, okay, see what we did? We helped you guys out. In reality, we're still going down the track, and going over a cliff. See, people don't understand this. You keep compromising, eventually you're over the cliff. In this regard, the American socialists are not less devious than their British controllers. Of course, they adopted a British Fabian socialist attitude towards nationalism, declared it to be irrelevant and non-essential to achieving what they call social equality, i.e. socialism. American socialists joined with their British cousins, that is, in declaring that the best way to break down nationalism and advance the cause of socialism is via a gradual income tax program. Interesting. Taking from the haves and giving to the have-nots. But they don't have the guts to give out of their pockets, folks. You see, they are hypocrites indeed. All of them are. They're bullshitters. Fabian socialists can be identified by the company they keep and the programs they support. This rule of thumb is very helpful in singing out the secretive men and women. In the United States, they work as a slow pace than the British counterparts, never showing the direction in which they are traveling. One of their members, author J. Schlesinger Jr., who won a Pulitzer Prize for his socialist leadership, wrote, "There seems no inherent obstacle to the gradual," as his emphasis added, implementing of socialism in the United States through a series of new deals which is in process of backing into socialism. This is Partisan Review, 1947. We should be aware that traditional liberties we take for granted are gravely threatened by socialism, which brings far-reaching, damaging changes on the installment plan. All the while, thanks to their control of the book industry, publishing in general, and the press, we're going through a non-stop process of being conditioned through psycho politics to accept their socialist mandated changes as inedible. Their deadly destructive socialist programs forced upon the United States, beginning in the Wilson presidency, and always appeared to be beneficial and helpful, while in reality they were destructive and divisive. Socialism can be fairly described as a dangerous conspiracy cloaked in a mantle of reforms. Almost without exception, their programs have been and are always described as reforms. They're tweaking the system always, folks, but it's getting worse, you see. And letting it screw out more, that eventually they'll allow the train to go off the track. They know that. The socialists reform education and they're reforming healthcare. They reform the banking system. But in reality, all this reform has made it worse. They reformed so-called the Federal Reserve banks. They created the Federal Reserve banks, you see, and it benefited those individuals. You see, it's nothing to do with federal, it's not a reserve, it's not anything to do with a bank, folks. They reformed trade laws and broken down protective tariffs that had provided most of the revenue needed to run the country. Of course they did, right up until 1913. That's what people don't understand. They don't get it. Very simple. At one time, the only tax the United States charged, pretty much, was import tax. It was supposed to guarantee industry that was here to be protected from foreigners so that these guys get their act together and builds up, and eventually the prices would come in line so the American people could buy from their own people here in the United States. That all ended. The major part was the NAFTA deal. So you can move out your plant and everything, facilities in the United States, go to Mexico, build a brand new plant, and guess what? You can have 50 to 60% what we call rejects, what we call not up to par, inferior products, and yet pay these people $1 or $2 an hour, which is slavery. And then import it back in the country without even being charged, and then destroy whatever companies are here go belly up. It's that simple. It's not rocket science, folks. It never was. We don't make anything anymore. We can't even be self-sufficient anymore. It's that clear. We don't build anything anymore, folks. In education, the Fabian socialists seek to create a mediocrity majority. Yes, very much so. That has the semblance, but not the substance of being educated. It's an attitude of what I would call, it's just everything's okay. Yeah, I don't really want to give any more to the company or whatever. I'm just happy with what I'm doing, such and such. The next thing you know, no one comes up with ideas anymore because no one's being taught anything. And so what happens is the country just wastes and falls in itself. It just falls flat without anyone actually attacking it per se from outside like a military. It just falls on its own. That's what's happening in Europe, and it's what's happening here in America. So it's a mediocrity attitude. We just get along, such and such. No one's really actually trying to stop this train without brakes, you see. The Fabian socialists fought a secret war to gain control of education, which began in the 1920s and eventually triumphed in the 1980s with the passage of the Department of Education signed into law by President Carter. The great victory for socialists guaranteed that henceforth only mediocre students would leave high school. That was the sum and substance of social reform of education. There is a misconception abroad that we are as smarter today than our forebears. Yet, if we look at the school curriculum in 1857, we find that this is an absolutely false idea. The subject in which high school students have to be proficient enough to graduate included Thompson's arithmetic, Robertson's algebra, Davy's geometry, Comstone's philosophy, Willard's history, Cutter's philosophical, Brown's grammar, Mitchell's geographics, Sanders' series. I don't know who these people are, but there was a different particular approach for that. But the other problem simply was that we didn't even have to have even that, folks. That was compulsory, even that. I don't agree with this because compulsory education isn't right neither, you see. The government forced people to be compulsory. That's wrong. That was already a socialist idea already. People don't go far back and look at the whole idea of all this whole thing with public schooling and how it's been a rotting so to speak. Yes, at first it seemed to be great, but they gradually come in and infiltrate it. But it shouldn't have been compulsory. Never should have been. Looking at the curriculum of colleges in the late 1880s leaves one astounded by the complexity and number of subjects taught. In those days, students studied history and knew all about Napoleon and Alexander the Great. There was no such thing as sheer guesswork, i.e., or multiple choice questions. Correct. Students couldn't answer the question in their exam papers as they could not or they did not. If they did not know them, they were failed and had to stay back to do further study. There were no elective methods to get by what you did not know. Today, there is one elective after another, which leaves students uneducated, unprepared for the outside world. Mediocrity is the result. That is the desired goal of Fabian socialism, education reforms. It's all of us in the same boat, folks, and the boat is sinking. To produce a nation with mediocre educational levels. The great socialist mischief that laid education in the United States low came with the United States Supreme Court case Brown versus School Board in Topeka, Kansas. In this case, the socialists arranged matters so that the educational standards were set just above the lowest common denominator, slightly above the more backward elements in the classroom. That was the level at which all children were henceforth to be taught. Obviously, the upper range of intelligent students were held at the mediocre level. Yes. So far, has education regressed in the United States that even those whom we think we elect to serve as Congress do not understand the language of the Constitution of the United States? And our senators, most of them are lawyers, folks. Let's get to the point. In particular, grow more incompetent in the Constitution with each passing year. Returning to the Bolshevik Revolution, the deception was the socialist leaders in England gave their false impression that it was a socialist revolution meant to improve the lot of the Russian people and put pay to the tyrannical kingdom of the Romanovs. In fact, the Romanovs were the most venal of all monarchs in Europe, with genuine love and caring for their people. Deception is hard maul of socialists. You know who did these, who killed government agencies, folks? Do you know who Bolsheviks are? Do you know who nationality they are? Very few of them were Russians. That's a clue. Its motto made haste slowly and deceptive because socialism has not gone slowly and is not a friend of the working people. Socialism is communists proceeding more cautiously, but the goals are the same. Although the means different in some instances, the common goal of communism and socialism is to liquidate the true capitalist free enterprise system and replace it with a strong central government which has control of every aspect of production and distribution of goods and services. Anyone who stands in the way is immediately labeled a reactionary, a right-wing extremist, or a McCarthy reactionist, or a fascist. See, they label you. That's how they get away with it. Religious extremists, and so on and on. When you hear these words spoken, then you know the speaker is a socialist. They can't argue on the issues, folks. They always blackball you. That's what they do because they're brainwashed themselves. Communism and socialism have as their common objective as ushering in a federal one world government, or as it has become very popular, known as the New World Order. Learn what their leaders have to say. You see, I am convinced that socialism is correct. I am an adherent of socialism. We are not going to change Soviet policy, of course, or abandon its fundamental principles, but we will acknowledge the need for changes that will strengthen socialism. Mikhail Gorbachev. Quote. The ultimate aim of the Council of Foreign Relations is to create a one world socialist system and make the United States an official part of it. Senator Dan Smoot in the unseen hand. The American people will never knowingly accept socialism, but under the name of liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until one day America will be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. The United States is making greater strides towards adopting socialism under Eisenhower than under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Norman Thomas, Two Worlds. To understand the full plan and purpose of Florence Kelley's as legislative action of American socialists, one must first carefully read the Declaration of Principles of Fabian Socialist International Socialism. The purpose is to secure a majority in Congress and every state legislature to win the principal executive and judicial office, to become the dominant party, and when in power, to transfer the industrialists and industries to the ownership by the people, beginning with those of public character, such as banking, insurance, and etc. In the United States, the vast majority of socialists are found in the Democratic Party, and a smattering of progressives in the Republican Party. But that's all changed, folks. This book was written back in the 90s. This action favoring socialists is a political party, albeit by adoption, as it was in England, to take over the Labour Party. It will be called that Kelly was the driving force behind the highly destructive force of false psycho-judicial Brandeis brief, which changed the way rulings are arrived at by the Supreme Court. Kelly was a close friend of socialist lesbian, that's right, Eleanor Roosevelt. Did you know that Eleanor Roosevelt visited the Soviet Union? Do you know she was pretty much a closet communist? The Brandeis briefs method totally sabotaged our legal system, and another example of unwanted, undesirable socialist originated changes being forced on the people of the United States. In page 9962 and 9977, there's a congressional record, the Senate, you can look it up, May 31st, 1924, we find the socialist and the communist aims spelled out even more plainly. In short, American communists themselves admit that it is impossible to promote revolution in this country unless the rights of the states are destroyed and a centralized bureaucracy under entrenched case of bureaucrats similar to those in Europe for communists and socialists, the basic conditions for revolution. While this is slanted towards the communist goal, let us not forget that it is also the socialist goal, differing only by method and degree. To which I would add that under President Johnson, Carter, Bush, and Clinton, the social agenda for the United States has gone into high gear. Clinton will be a single-term president, will do more to strongly promote socialist plans and do more actual damage than Roosevelt or Eisenhower Johnson. Actually, he was wrong. Clinton won twice. He won the 1992 election, and he got away with a lot of stuff, folks. And in 1996, he won again. So I'm going to stop here. Yeah, it's been a little while, hours and 16 minutes here. Wanted to just simply stop because basically I could go all night. I'm pretty tired and need to take a break. But again, this is work by John Coleman, One World Order, Socialist to Dictatorship. We've just gone through only 32 pages of a book that's 217 pages long. Brilliant. This guy did a lot of research, folks, really did. So we'll start there tomorrow or maybe this evening and continue. I hope that you're aware. The only way to see this is to make yourself aware of the history and what has happened at this point and see how things are so bad now that you've got to see it. You've got to have eyes to see, you have ears to hear. And then you have the realization, okay, let me begin. And then you begin to work what I call underground type of work, just explaining to your neighbors and your family, and saying, we're in a hell of a mess here, and we've got to turn the ship around. I don't know how it's going to happen, but we are not going to support this type of system anymore. No, we're not going to fight anything out. The ideas must conquer people. They must have events and say, look what's happened in the last 50 to 60 years. We've lost it, you see. No, quote unquote, let's go out and march such and such. No, it's by stealth. Do the same thing they do within your own families and share with them, and then tell them to learn these things or grab a book, teach them themselves or watch these videos, and then you actually are able to share with other people and you begin to understand we're in a hell of a mess here. And then you get people's ears put such a post up, hopefully. Anyway, I appreciate you being here and you have a good day. Thank you for your comments and we'll see you later. Thank you.